At my sister's wedding, they handed me a place card labeled non-priority guest. My own mother leaned over and whispered, "That just means you're not sitting with the family." So I stood up, walked calmly to the gift table, picked up my $10,000 check, folded it once, slipped it into my clutch, and said, loud enough for the whole head table to hear, "If I'm only here out of courtesy, then so is this." The room went silent. My sister's smile dropped. And that was the moment everything they had spent 30 years pretending fell completely apart. But you need to understand something. That check wasn't just money. It was 3 years of night shifts, skipped vacations, and loans I never asked to be paid back. And that place card? It wasn't a mistake. It was a message. One they had been writing to me my entire life. They just finally put it in writing. Let me take you back to where this really started. My name is Renley. And from the outside, my family looked like the kind you'd see on a greeting card. A big house in a quiet suburb of Richmond, Virginia. A mother who volunteered at church bake sales and always wore the right shade of lipstick. A father who coached Little League even when he was exhausted. And 2 daughters, Ellery, the golden one, and me. Ellery was 2 years older than me, and she had always been the one the world seemed to organize itself around. She was beautiful in the effortless way that made people stop mid-sentence. She was charming without trying. She laughed at the right moments and cried at the right ones too, in a way that made everyone around her feel like she understood things more deeply than the rest of us. Teachers loved her. Neighbors adored her. Our extended family lit up when she walked into a room. And me? I was the quiet one. The responsible one. The one who got good grades but never got a party. The one who worked 2 jobs through college while Ellery got her tuition fully funded by our parents. I never complained about that. Not once, because I told myself it was fine. I told myself I was building something. That being overlooked now meant I'd have something real later. My mother, Arlette, had a way of making the imbalance invisible. She never said outright that she loved Ellery more. She didn't need to. It lived in the little things. The way she'd hang up Ellery's artwork on the refrigerator, but tuck mine into a drawer. The way she'd retell Ellery's stories at dinner parties, but go quiet when someone asked about me. The way she'd buy Ellery birthday cakes from the fancy bakery downtown and pick mine up from the grocery store, already half discounted because it was almost closing time. I had spent most of my childhood and all of my 20s convincing myself it wasn't that bad. That I was reading too much into things. That I was being sensitive. That one day, things would balance out. That one day, my family would look at me and actually see me. I was 31 years old. I was still waiting. When Ellery called me to announce her engagement to Cormac Aldridge, I was genuinely happy for her. Cormac was a financial consultant from Charlottesville, polished, confident, the kind of man who made every room feel smaller just by standing in it. He and Ellery had met at a rooftop charity event 2 summers ago, and within 18 months, he had proposed with a ring that cost more than most people's cars. I congratulated her. I meant it. What I didn't expect was the phone call that came 3 days later from my mother. "Renley, I need to talk to you about the wedding budget." I remember sitting down slowly at my kitchen table, the way you do when you know the next sentence is going to cost you something. "Ellery and Cormac have a vision," Arlette said, her voice warm and careful the way it always got when she needed something from me. "The venue they want is Halcyon Estates, out near the Shenandoah countryside. It's stunning, Ren, it really is. But the deposit alone is $40,000, and with everything going on with your father's retirement and the repairs we had to do on the house, we're a little stretched." I waited. "I know you've been doing well at the firm," she continued. "And I know you've been saving. I just thought, if you could contribute something meaningful, it would mean so much to Ellery. To all of us." I should have asked questions. I should have asked what meaningful meant, what the full breakdown looked like, whether Cormac's family was contributing. But I didn't. Because some part of me, the part that had spent 3 decades trying to earn my place in my own family, heard it would mean so much and thought, this is my chance. I wrote a check for $10,000 within the week. No contract. No written agreement. Just a check slipped into an envelope with a card that said, "For Ellery's future. With love, Renley." My mother texted back 3 words. "She'll be thrilled." Ellery never called to say thank you. The next 8 months were a masterclass in being included, just enough to be used. Arlette added me to the wedding planning group chat on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, I had been assigned to coordinate with the florist, follow up with the caterer about dietary restrictions, and manage RSVPs for the extended family on our father's side, 43 people, most of whom I hadn't spoken to in years. Nobody asked if I had the bandwidth. Nobody offered to split the tasks. It was simply assumed that I would handle it, because I always did. I drove out to Halcyon Estates twice for venue walkthroughs. I spent 3 weekends calling relatives to confirm attendance. I put together a full spreadsheet tracking meal choices, seating preferences, and travel accommodations for out-of-town guests. I did all of it without being asked twice, without complaining, and without once thinking to wonder why I was doing the work of a wedding planner while also being one of the guests. During this entire period, Ellery and I spoke maybe 4 times. Each conversation followed the same pattern. She would open with something breathless and excited about the centerpieces or the honeymoon itinerary. I would listen, respond warmly, ask questions. She would talk for 20 minutes and then say she had to run. Not once did she ask how I was doing. Not once did she ask if the coordination work was getting to be too much. Not once did she say, even casually, even in passing, thank you. I told myself that was just how Ellery was. That she was caught up in the whirlwind of it all. That after the wedding, things would settle and we'd have a real conversation. I kept making excuses for her the way I always had, the way I had been trained to. 6 weeks before the wedding, I drove over to my parents' house to drop off the finalized RSVP spreadsheet. I had printed it out and put it in a folder, color-coded, with tabs. I know that sounds like overkill, but that's who I am. I do things completely or I don't do them. My mother was on a call when I arrived, so I let myself in through the side door the way I always did. I set the folder on the kitchen counter, poured myself a glass of water, and was about to text her that I'd dropped it off when I heard voices from the living room. Arlette's voice. And Ellery's. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. But the house was quiet and voices carry, and what I heard stopped me completely. She's just so much easier to manage when she feels involved, Ellery was saying. Her tone was light, almost amused. Give her a task and she does it without asking for anything in return. It's honestly kind of perfect. My mother laughed softly. She's always been like that. Just needs to feel needed. I know. But Cormac's mother wants to sit at table 1 with us, and honestly, there just isn't room for everyone. Renley will understand. She always does. I stood in that kitchen for a long time after their voices moved on to other topics. The glass of water was still in my hand. I hadn't taken a single sip. She's just so much easier to manage. I set the glass down very carefully. I picked up my keys. I walked back out the side door without saying a word to either of them. And I sat in my car for 45 minutes before I felt steady enough to drive. I almost didn't go. I want to be honest about that. The morning of the wedding, I sat at the edge of my bed in my dress, a dusty rose midi that I had bought specifically because Ellery had sent a color swatch and said, "Something in this family, please," and I genuinely considered calling and saying I was sick. That I couldn't make it. That something had come up. But I went. Partly because I still, even then, even after everything, wanted to believe that I was wrong about all of it. That the conversation I had overheard was taken out of context. That maybe today would be the day my family surprised me. I arrived at Halcyon Estates just after noon. The venue was genuinely breathtaking. Rolling hills behind a white colonial-style manor, roses climbing the stone entrance, string lights already threaded through the trees for the evening reception. It was the kind of place that made you believe, for just a moment, that everything beautiful was possible. A coordinator greeted guests at the entrance and handed out the place cards from a beautifully arranged display near the front doors. Ivory cardstock, gold lettering, each one nestled in a small floral holder. She found my name and handed me mine with a smile. I looked down at the card. Renley, non-priority guest. Table 14. I read it twice. I thought perhaps I had misread it. I read it a third time. Non-priority guest. Those exact words. Printed in the same elegant gold font as everything else. As if the cruelty of it had been dressed up and made beautiful on purpose. I was still staring at it when Arlette appeared at my elbow, her perfume arriving a half-second before she did. "Oh, you got yours," she said lightly, glancing at the card. Table 14 is lovely, Ren. Near the windows. Mom. My voice was very quiet. It says non-priority guest. She tilted her head slightly, the way she always did when she was about to explain something to me that she thought I should already understand. That just means you're not sitting with the immediate family, sweetheart. It's a seating category. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. I looked at her for a long moment. At the careful makeup, the practiced smile, the way her eyes didn't quite meet mine when she said it. And something that had been held tightly inside me for 31 years, something coiled and patient and very, very tired, finally let go. I didn't yell. I want to make that clear. There was no scene in the traditional sense. No raised voice. No tears. No dramatic speech delivered to a horrified crowd. What I did was quieter than that. And somehow, because of that, so much more devastating. I turned and walked to the gift table. It was set up near the entrance, draped in white linen, already holding a beautiful arrangement of wrapped boxes and envelopes. My contribution sat in a cream envelope with Ellery and Cormac's names written on the front in my own handwriting. I picked it up. I opened my clutch, slid the envelope inside, and closed it with a soft click. Then I turned back toward the entrance, where a small cluster of guests had gathered, including two of Cormac's aunts, a family friend I recognized from years ago, and a junior coordinator who had frozen mid-step with a clipboard in her hand. My mother was still standing a few feet away. Her expression had shifted. The practiced warmth was gone. In its place was something uncertain, the look of a woman who had just realized, for the first time, that the outcome she had always taken for granted was no longer guaranteed. Ellery had appeared in the hallway behind her. She was already in her gown, ivory, off-shoulder, stunning, and she was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Something between confusion and alarm. I spoke clearly, calmly, without a single tremor in my voice. I coordinated your RSVPs. I managed your florist. I drove out here twice for walkthroughs you didn't even attend. I gave you $10,000 because I wanted you to feel supported. And today, on your wedding day, you gave me a card that says I am a non-priority guest. I paused. If I'm only here out of courtesy, then so is this. I touched my clutch once, just lightly, just enough to make it clear, and then I walked toward the exit. Behind me, I heard Arlette say my name. Once, sharply. Then again, softer, with something in it I hadn't heard before. Something that sounded almost like panic. I kept walking. I drove home with the windows down even though it was cold. I needed the air. I needed to feel something that wasn't the inside of that room. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my phone had 17 notifications. Missed calls from Arlette. 2 texts from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in 4 years who had apparently already heard what happened. A voicemail from a number I didn't recognize, which turned out to be Cormac's mother, of all people, who had somehow gotten my number and wanted to discuss what occurred. I set my phone face down on the kitchen counter and made myself a cup of tea. I sat at my table, the same table where I had written that check 8 months ago, and I let myself feel everything I had been holding back all day. The grief of it. Because that's what it was, underneath everything else. Grief. For the sister I had always hoped Ellery might one day become. For the mother I had spent my whole life trying to earn approval from. For the version of this family that existed in my head and apparently nowhere else. I cried for about 20 minutes. And then I stopped, because I had said what I needed to say and done what I needed to do, and I was not going to spend the rest of the night mourning people who had never once mourned the thought of losing me. The calls kept coming over the next 2 days. Arlette's messages cycled through every stage of a very predictable pattern. First, confusion. I don't understand what happened, Renley. Can you please call me? Then irritation. This was completely unnecessary and you embarrassed this family. Then something that tried to sound like remorse but landed closer to damage control. I think there was a miscommunication and I'd like to talk about it. Ellery didn't call. Not that day. Not the next. She texted on day 3. The message was 4 sentences long and managed to include the phrases, I was blindsided, my wedding day, and I think you owe me an apology without once acknowledging the place card, the $10,000, or the conversation I had overheard 6 weeks earlier. I read the text twice. Then I set my phone down and went for a walk. What I hadn't expected, what none of them had expected, was the ripple. There had been guests at that entrance when I walked out. Real people with eyes and ears, and their own quiet observations about my family accumulated over years of holidays and gatherings. And what they had witnessed wasn't a dramatic meltdown. It wasn't a jealous sister making a scene. It was a woman, dressed beautifully, speaking in a measured voice about what had been done to her, and then leaving with her dignity entirely intact. People talk. By the end of the wedding weekend, I had received 3 private messages from extended family members. 2 of them were cousins who said some version of, "I've seen this pattern for years, and I'm glad you finally said something." One was an aunt on my father's side who I had always quietly respected, a woman named Georgette, sharp and no-nonsense, who sent me a message that said simply, "You were right. And for what it's worth, you were always the one who actually showed up." Then something happened that I genuinely had not anticipated. One of Cormac's aunts, a woman named Philippa who had apparently been standing close enough to hear everything, reached out through a mutual contact. She was gracious and measured in the way that people are when they've seen enough of life to know that family dysfunction is rarely one-sided. She told me she had spent the weekend quietly piecing together what she was witnessing, and that she had some significant concerns about what Cormac had been told and not told about the financial arrangements leading up to the wedding. It turned out that Cormac had been under the impression that my $10,000 was a loan his own family had extended, funneled through Arlette. He had a record of it in his own financial documents, labeled, apparently, as a family contribution from the Aldridge side. He had never been told it came from me. He had never been told it existed at all, in any form that connected back to me. I sat with that information for a long time. I called a close friend named Sable, someone I had known since graduate school, someone who had watched my family dynamics from a careful distance for years and had long ago stopped trying to convince me that things were better than they were. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I love most about her. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What do you want to happen now?" It was the right question. Because up until that point, I had been so focused on surviving the situation, on just getting through it without falling apart, that I hadn't actually sat down and decided what I wanted the outcome to be. I thought about it seriously. I didn't want revenge in any dramatic sense. I didn't want Ellery's marriage to fall apart. I didn't want Arlette to be humiliated or my father to be blindsided. Those outcomes wouldn't give me anything I actually needed. What I wanted was the truth to exist somewhere outside of my own head. I wanted Cormac to know where that money actually came from. I wanted my own financial contribution to my sister's wedding to be documented, not because I wanted it back, necessarily, but because I refused to let it be erased. And I wanted my family to understand, clearly and without ambiguity, that the version of me they had been relying on, the quiet one, the manageable one, the one who just needed to feel needed, was no longer available. I drafted a letter. It took me 4 days and 6 versions. I sent it to Cormac directly, with a copy to Philippa, who had offered to ensure it reached him without being intercepted. The letter was factual, not emotional. It outlined the timeline of the contribution, the wire transfer details, the date and amount. It did not accuse anyone of anything. It simply stated what had happened and let the facts speak for themselves. I never found out exactly what conversation followed between Cormac and Ellery. That wasn't mine to know. What I did find out through Georgette was that there had been a conversation. A significant one. And that certain arrangements from the early days of their marriage were being revisited with considerably more scrutiny than Ellery had anticipated. 3 weeks after the wedding, my father called me. My father, Bernard, was a quiet man who had always operated in the space between Arlette's decisions and the rest of the world. He wasn't a bad man. He was the kind of man who avoided conflict so long and so completely that avoidance had become his entire personality. But he called me, which was significant. He had never initiated a difficult conversation in my memory. He didn't offer explanations or excuses. He said, "I didn't know about the place card until after. I want you to know that." I told him I believed him. He said, "I should have paid more attention." For a long time. I told him I knew. We talked for 40 minutes. It wasn't a resolution. Not really. 40 minutes of quiet honesty doesn't undo 31 years of learned invisibility. But it was something real. Something that hadn't existed between us before. and I was willing to hold it carefully and see where it went. Arlette and I did not speak for 2 months. When she finally came to me, not with a phone call, but in person, standing on my porch on a gray Tuesday morning, she looked smaller than I had ever seen her. Not physically. Something else. Like the architecture of her certainty had shifted. She didn't apologize the way I had once imagined she might. There was no tearful confession, no acknowledgement of every specific thing that had gone wrong over the decades. What she offered was quieter and more complicated than that. She said, "I think I made Ellery into something, and I didn't realize what that cost you." It wasn't enough, but it was the most honest thing she had ever said to me, and I was not going to dismiss it. I told her I heard her. I told her that if she wanted things to be different, the work of making them different would have to be ongoing. Not a single conversation on a porch, but a consistent, sustained choice. She nodded. She looked like she understood, even if she wasn't entirely sure she was capable of it. Ellery and I didn't speak for 4 months. When she finally reached out, it was not the message I had expected. There was no continued demand for an apology. What she sent was longer and more uncertain, a message that started 3 times and visibly restarted, the kind of thing you write and delete and rewrite until something true manages to get through. She said she had been doing a lot of thinking. She said she had never considered what it might have felt like to be me growing up. She said she wasn't sure she fully understood it even now, but that she was starting to. It wasn't a transformation. I want to be clear about that. Ellery didn't become a different person in the months after her wedding. But something had cracked open, some awareness that hadn't been there before, and I wasn't willing to close the door on that entirely. I wrote back. I kept it honest and I kept it short. I told her that I didn't need her to be perfect. I needed her to be real. That for most of my life, I had felt like a supporting character in a story that was supposedly about our family, and that I was done accepting that role. She replied, "I hear you. I'm trying." Maybe she meant it. Maybe it would last. Maybe the whole architecture of us would shift, slowly, the way things shift when people finally decide to be honest with each other instead of comfortable. I didn't know. I still don't. What I know is this. I walked out of that venue with my $10,000, my dignity, and the clearest sense of myself I had ever had. I stopped performing gratitude for being included. I stopped shrinking to make other people's choices feel less uncomfortable. I stopped waiting for my family to see me and decided, finally, to be seen on my own terms. The place card said non-priority guest. And the moment I walked out that door, I understood, completely and without any grief left in it, that I had never been a guest in my own story. I was the main character. I just hadn't been acting like one. There is a version of this story where I went back. Where I sat at table 14 near the windows, quiet and grateful for being included at all. Where I smiled in the photos and clapped during the first dance and drove home alone afterward, swallowing everything I felt the way I always had. I used to think that version made me the bigger person. Now I know it just made me smaller. You teach people how to treat you, not with speeches or ultimatums, but with what you are willing to accept, year after year, without saying a word. I had been teaching my family for 31 years, and the lesson I had given them was, Renly will be fine. Renly always adjusts. Renly doesn't need much. The day I took that check back was the day I finally changed the lesson. And I have not regretted it once. So let me ask you this. Have you ever done something for someone who made you feel like it wasn't enough, no matter what you gave? Tell me in the comments below. I read every single one.